On a bitterly cold winter morning, Officer Daniel was making his usual rounds outside the precinct when he noticed a stray puppy scratching weakly at the iron gates. The little creature was shivering so hard that its tiny ribs could be seen with every breath. But what caught Daniel's attention was not just its pitiful state, it was the faded, torn piece of fabric clutched stubbornly between its teeth. The officers nearby laughed softly, dismissing it as just another stray carrying garbage, a rag it had found in some alley. Yet the puppy's behavior was far from ordinary. It didn't whimper or drop the cloth when Daniel reached toward it. Instead, its dark, pleading eyes seemed to beg the humans to understand. The little one pawed insistently at Daniel's boots, nudging the fabric forward, then retreating back as if to say, "Follow me. This matters." Something about the pup's determination made Daniel pause. The little dog refused to be ignored. Every time an officer passed by, it scampered after them, dragging its tiny paws through the frost and laid the fabric squarely in front of their boots. It would then sit back on its haunches, tail tucked tight against its belly, and look up with eyes that seemed far too soulful for a creature so small. Those eyes did not ask for food or warmth. They carried something heavier, something that looked like desperation. The whine that escaped its throat was thin, trembling, yet insistent, as though it carried a story locked deep within the threads of that scrap. Most officers brushed it aside with indulgent chuckles, muttering, "Just a silly stray." But Daniel lingered. He bent down, picked up the rag carefully, and for a moment held it against the light. The fabric was old, its color long faded, edges frayed from years of wear. It wasn't trash, it was history. Something about it stirred a quiet unease in his chest. Instead of discarding it like the others expected, Daniel folded it neatly, slipping it into his pocket. As the puppy wagged its tail faintly, Daniel whispered to himself, "All right, little one. I'll keep it safe." Later that evening, when the station had quieted down and most of the officers were finishing their reports, Daniel pulled the fabric from his pocket. Under the pale glow of the desk lamp, he ran his fingers over its rough threads. At first, it seemed ordinary, just a scrap torn from some long-forgotten garment. But then, as he tilted it closer to the light, he noticed something faintly stitched in one corner. The embroidery was worn thin, threads unraveling, but still visible. 2 letters, MR. The initials were small, delicate, almost invisible to an untrained eye. For a long moment, Daniel stared at them, and his chest tightened with recognition. Those letters were not random. They belonged to a name etched into the back of his memory, Maria Rodriguez. He remembered the case vividly because he had been a rookie back then when the entire town was shaken by her sudden disappearance. A teenage girl, bright and full of promise, had vanished one summer evening, and despite weeks of searching, every lead had gone cold. The case file still sat in the precinct archives, gathering dust, labeled unsolved. Seeing her initials on that scrap was like hearing a voice from the past, calling for justice. Daniel's breath slowed, his mind racing. Could this little stray have carried a clue that everyone else had overlooked for years? He glanced at the puppy curled asleep by the heater, its tiny chest rising and falling, unaware that it might have just reopened a mystery the world had long forgotten. The next morning, with the scrap of fabric carefully sealed in evidence, Daniel and 2 fellow officers made a decision that felt both strange and necessary. They would let the little stray guide them. As soon as the precinct gates opened, the puppy shot forward, its paws tapping urgently against the frozen ground. The men exchanged doubtful glances, but followed anyway. The pup trotted with uncanny certainty, weaving through narrow alleys littered with broken bottles, squeezing beneath leaning fences, and pausing only to glance back, as if making sure they were still behind. After nearly 20 minutes, it stopped at the edge of town, where the fields met the woods. Before them loomed an old farmhouse, long abandoned, its roof sagging, windows shattered, and silence pressing heavy around it. The place looked forgotten by time, draped in dust and shadows. Yet the puppy darted inside without hesitation, its small body slipping through a gap in the doorway. Daniel's boots crunched on the warped porch as he followed, the others close behind. The air inside was thick with decay, cobwebs hanging like curtains, floorboards groaning under every step. Then, suddenly, the pup barked, sharp, insistent, not at the walls or the corners, but at the very floor beneath their feet. Its paws scratched wildly against the rotting wood, as though it knew that something was hidden below, waiting to be found. The officers froze, hearts pounding, realizing that this animal had not led them here by chance. Daniel's hands trembled slightly as he wedged the crowbar into the swollen seams of the warped floorboards. With a grunt, the wood cracked, splinters flying as the officers pried open the hidden space beneath. A damp, musty odor escaped, the kind that only comes from years of silence and decay. The beam of a flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing a shallow cavity stuffed with forgotten belongings. One by one, they pulled the items out: a tiny, mud-stained shoe no bigger than the size of a child's palm, its leather hardened and cracked by time, a rusted silver locket, its delicate chain tangled but still carrying the faint image of a girl's face, blurred yet recognizable, and torn scraps of fabric, worn and faded, identical to the one the little puppy had carried so desperately in its mouth. The officers exchanged stunned looks as recognition settled over them like a heavy weight. These weren't just random relics of a forgotten family. They were evidence. Daniel's voice broke the silence, low and certain. This matches the Rodriguez file. The name hung in the air like a ghost, pulling them back to a case that had haunted the precinct for nearly 15 years. The disappearance of Maria Rodriguez, the young girl who had vanished without a trace. Now, with the proof spread before them, the line between past and present blurred, and the mystery that had once seemed lost to time stirred back to life, demanding answers. The puppy barked again, as if urging them forward. The dusty file of Maria Rodriguez, once buried in the archives, was placed on the precinct desk once more. Its pages, yellowed with age, carried photographs, witness statements, and unanswered questions that had haunted the community for over a decade. When the news spread that the case had been reopened, shock rippled through the station. Officers who had once worked the investigation sat in silence, their faces etched with disbelief. Families who had long surrendered to grief were contacted, their hearts torn open between pain and the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, truth would finally emerge. But what rattled everyone most was not the reopening itself, but the strange messenger that had sparked it, a nameless stray puppy. Whispers filled the town's streets and tea shops. Some called it fate, others destiny, and some dared to say it was a miracle. How had a fragile creature uncovered what dozens of trained men and years of searching had overlooked? Children pointed at the dog when it passed, calling it a hero. Elders nodded with awe, murmuring that God sometimes chooses the weakest vessels to reveal the greatest truths. The little pup, unaware of the storm it had stirred, simply wagged its tail and sat at the precinct steps, waiting faithfully as if it knew its work was not yet finished. When the forensic lab confirmed the DNA results, silence fell in the precinct. The shoe and locket indeed belonged to Maria Rodriguez. For years, her disappearance had remained a painful mystery, the files stamped with unsolved and slowly collecting dust. But now, with this undeniable link, the case was no longer just a memory. It was alive again. Officers revisited old witness statements, photographs, and suspects, sifting through details that had once seemed irrelevant. One name kept resurfacing, a man who had lived near the Rodriguez family back then. He had been questioned at the time, but released due to lack of evidence. Suddenly, with the new discovery, suspicion shifted back toward him. Daniel felt a strange shiver as he read the man's file. It was as if Maria herself, through this stray puppy, had been crying out for justice all these years. The town buzzed with renewed tension. Could the truth finally be within reach? The puppy, unaware of the weight of its actions, still sat by Daniel's desk, its eyes bright, tail wagging, as if urging them not to stop now. For the officers, this was no longer just about closing a case. It was about giving peace to a family and answering a question that had haunted their community for nearly 15 years. The stray dog had sparked a fire no one could put out. The precinct no longer saw the little dog as just another stray wandering the streets. He had become a living reminder of hope, courage, and fate. Newspapers printed his story, calling him the puppy detective, while the townspeople came to the station just to see him, offering treats and soft pats on the head. For Daniel, however, the bond was far more personal. He had watched the trembling pup walk in that cold morning with nothing but a torn piece of fabric, yet that small act had reshaped an entire investigation. One evening, after all the commotion settled, Daniel knelt down beside the dog, stroked his soft fur, and whispered, "You deserve a real home." He named him Chance, because that's what the dog had given everyone: a chance for answers, a chance for healing, and a chance to believe in miracles again. From that day on, Chance never left Daniel's side. He became part of the precinct family, curling up near the officer's boots during long shifts and wagging his tail at every visitor. Whenever the team faced obstacles in their cases, a single glance at Chance reminded them that sometimes justice doesn't come through strategy or strength, but through innocence, loyalty, and unexpected signs. Maria's family, though still grieving, finally felt a sense of peace, knowing the truth hadn't been buried forever. And all of it had started with a shivering puppy who refused to let go of a scrap of fabric, proof that even the smallest soul can carry the weight of destiny.